Thank you for joining us. I'm here with the prosecutors and investigators who have worked diligently on the investigation of criminal attempts to interfere in the administration of Georgia's 2020 presidential election. Today, based on information developed by that investigation, a Fulton County grand jury returned a true bill of indictment, charging 19 individuals with violations of Georgia law arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in this state. The indictment includes 41 felony counts and is 97 pages long. Please remember that everyone charged in this bill of indictment is presumed innocent. Specifically, the indictment brings felony charges against Donald John Trump, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, John Charles Eastman, Mark Randall Meadows, John Cheeseborough, Jeffrey Clark, Jenna Lynn Ellis, Ray Stallings Smith III, Robert David Cheeley, Michael A. Roman, David James Schaefer, Sean Micah Tresher Steele, Stephen Cliffgard Lee, Harrison William Prescott Floyd, Travion C. Cootie, Sydney Catherine Powell, Kathleen Austin Latham, Scott Graham Hall, and Misty Hampton, also known as Emily Misty Hayes. Every individual charged in the indictment is charged with one count of violating Georgia's Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act through participation in a criminal enterprise in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere to accomplish the illegal goal of allowing Donald J. Trump to seize the presidential term of office beginning on January 20th, 21. Specifically, the participants in association took various actions in Georgia and elsewhere to block the counting of the votes of the presidential electors who were certified as the winners of Georgia's 2020 general election. As you examine the indictment, you will see acts that are identified as overt acts and those that are identified as predicate acts, sometimes called acts of racketeering activity. Overt acts are not necessarily crimes under Georgia law in isolation, but are alleged to be acts taken in furtherance of the conspiracy. Many occurred in Georgia, and some occurred in other jurisdictions and are included because the grand jury believes they were part of the illegal effort to overturn the results of Georgia's 2020 presidential election. The acts identified as predicate acts or acts of racketeering activity are crimes that are alleged to have been committed in furtherance of the criminal enterprise. Acts of racketeering activity are also charged as separate counts in the indictment against those who are alleged to have committed them.
And if found guilty on them, the way I understand it, you have to serve time in some form or fashion pertaining to ridding this problem. One of the things that I found very, very enlightening about Georgia, because I'd been there 3 or 4 different times, Duluth and also Kennesaw and over towards Douglasville, is that trying to get my dates right. I'm thinking in 2011 or 2012, whenever the bubble burst happened, and it may have been earlier than that. It may have been more like 2008. But it really caused a ripple effect in Atlanta, to the degree that at the end of the year, while I was working for Kennesaw, Georgia, I could not even begin to believe how serious-minded that those people was towards people getting furloughs, basically having to work for free. Some of them got a week furlough, some of them got a couple week furlough. Come to find out that Georgia has a law that at the end of the year they have to have a balanced budget. It has to be equaled out. And I personally think that all states should have that law. That way it makes them work above and beyond the board to make sure that what they're doing is legitimate and it's for the will of their people. Now, I did notice there was one person that come in that line that become familiar with me. At the time, it was Governor Sonny Perdue that was the governor in 2006, when basically I left a cassette tape on the Capitol building that caused a extra day pay for everybody the day after Christmas that they basically blame me for. Whenever you have the GBI come to your workplace and questioning you towards how much money that you just got through costing the good people of Atlanta pertaining to Georgia, in how that they basically had to shut down the Calvary because they had found a cassette tape tied to the very door that Sonny Perdue come out of whenever he was praying for rain, because their lake west from there, west from Duluth, I guess about 20-30 miles west from Duluth, basically had gone almost completely dry. And it frightened them. It frightened all of them because they realized the seriousness of it. But was it ever so hot that year? And if I'm not mistaken, that was also the same year in, if I'm not mistaken, that was the same year that they had the fire outbreak up in eastern Tennessee that Dolly Parton had, or she didn't have to, she willfully helped the people that was involved in that fire out there. But it was also the year that Lake Okeechobee almost dried completely up down in Florida. That was a very, very hot, dry year that even to this day I still remember. And later on, me going back into Georgia, especially whenever the SWAT basically greeted me right there in the parking lot on the 4th of July night, I knew that something had entirely went wrong in the way that they was pursuing me on a international federal level pertaining to a federal dragnet based upon an illegitimate charge that had been placed up into my life over a Lieutenant Burns over in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that they was taking a standard warrant and turning it into a federal case. I knew at that particular point in time that I was under some sort of magnifying glass being looked at, listened to, analyzed, dissected, and judged in a way that most people never has to go through. Especially whenever the GBI wound up at Kennesaw Body Shop at my workplace, questioning me what I thought about a bombing that happened in Atlanta pertaining to an abortion clinic where somebody, Rudolph or whatever his name was, that stayed fugitive for like 4 or 5 years living in North Carolina, questioned me about what I felt about that, and I thought about the question. It kind of seemed like a trick question to me, but I come back with an answer, and the answer was, well, 2 wrongs don't make a right. It's wrong to kill innocent babies, and it's also wrong to plant bombs in abortion clinics and do bodily harm, and I think it blinded one girl and possibly killed another one. That's the reason why that they was after that guy the way that they was. But whenever they go to questioning you with questions, and you wind up going to a 4th of July event, and you're approached by SWAT, military personnel, whenever you have GBI come to your workplace in Duluth. At the time I was working for Collision Clinic outside of Duluth, Georgia. The guy owned about 6 or 7 body shops in 2006. He basically done about $60 million in about 6 shops in Atlanta. He played in the Olympics in the hockey, and he went back home because he liked America, and his mom or father had a business and they sold it, and he come back to Atlanta and started a body shop, and then opened up another body shop, opened up another body shop. And like I said, if you turn $60 million in 1 year in bolts and nuts and fenders and hoods and paint jobs, you have done something. That's the people that I was working for at the time. Whenever my boss man come to my workplace and said, there's some people up front that needs to speak to you. I said, okay, I'll be with them in a minute. And my boss man got loud. He said, you don't understand. He said, there are some important people up front that wants to speak to you now. That was not a request. That was an order. And as soon as I got up to the front office, there was 2 GBI agents that wanted to know what my intent was by leaving a cassette tape on the front of the Capitol building that had caused a dilemma in that whole area of a downtown Atlanta, to the point that I had no idea that this had occurred. That basically they told everybody to get an extra day off. All the state and federal workers, they all got an extra day off. I had no idea that that occurred. I had no idea that they had shut basically Atlanta down over a clear bag with a cassette tape in it with a business card that told them explicitly who I was and where I worked at. Why they overreacted that way, I don't know, but they did. But because of the interchanging that I have had with Atlanta, Georgia, I know that they are very, very serious-minded people, and if they even begin to think that you are a threat to them or their citizens, they will see to it in putting you in your place. And I'm sure all the top talking heads that she just got through mentioning thinks that this is some sort of a monopoly game of some sort towards get out of jail free card. I got news for you. These people do not play And whenever they go after somebody, they're going after them for the jugular vein. And it don't matter what your name begins with, it don't matter what your name ends with. Like I said, if they even begin to think that you are some sort of a threat to either them or their people, they will see to it in getting to the bottom of it, in trying to determine whether or not you need to be locked up and put away. Because don't think for a second that they won't do it. They're probably more serious-minded than the people in Chicago. I'm not going to say that they're more serious-minded than the people in New York, but they're definitely more serious-minded than the people in LA and San Francisco and even some of these other regions, including Texas. For what reason? I don't know. It's probably because Atlanta has grown the way that it has in the past 30 plus years, and you've had everybody and their brother either come from New York or Boston or Washington, D.C., any and everybody on the East Coast has basically merged down in Atlanta towards wanting to start their own little business. It don't matter if it's a hairdressing business or a plumbing business or a body shop business or whatever. And once I got down into the fundamentals of Atlanta and understanding their underground, and they do have an underground, and once I identified their syndicate black market in how that they had chop shops everywhere, to the point that you could basically pull your automobile over to a corner somewhere, get out and go to a business, and 7 minutes later come back out of the door and everything in your automobile would be stripped, doors off, rims, tires off, motor transmission out, dash out of the vehicle, and wasn't nothing left but a bare skeleton. They done took the doors, the hood, the deck lid, the grill, the any and everything, and now it's just sitting there on blocks. Sometimes it ain't even on blocks. Especially whenever you wind up down in downtown Atlanta on Freaknik night, in which I've been down in that area. They're just some very, very, I don't want to use the word classy in what that they do and how that they do it, but ordinarily you are not going to go into their city and go into their state without somebody identifying who you are and what you are. Especially once I left, let me make sure I get my facts right. Once I had left Montgomery, Alabama, in working for a guy over in Athens, and I also worked a little bit in Montgomery, Alabama for Bill Hurd Chrysler, Bill Hurd Chevrolet, and I went to Savannah, Georgia, and I started working there in another body shop, and I forgot the name of it. It wasn't Ward's. Ward's was in North Carolina. I forgot the name of it, but this guy, he was a pretty big guy. He had 6 or 7 shops there in Savannah. Of course, it wasn't near the volume that Atlanta has in Savannah, because Savannah is basically a East Coast town, similar towards like Jacksonville or Devil's Island or some of those other classy places that we hear about on the East Coast. But once I got up into that area and got to working for this guy, I made up some cassette tapes again and started passing them out to the churches, and within a matter of probably 24 hours, they was already hunting me and looking at me and eyeballing me. That's whenever I realized that it had gotten entirely too serious for me in Savannah, Georgia, and that's whenever I decided to pull up stakes again, and I went to Montgomery, Alabama, working for Montgomery, Alabama and Paint in Montgomery, working for Mr. Donnie and his son. I forgot his son's name now. But that's whenever I went to working for him, not realizing that my boss man had a direct contract with the governor towards working on every one of their state trooper cars. It didn't matter if it was northern Alabama, southern Alabama, middle Alabama. It didn't matter if it was a scratch on a fender or it was a wreck that was almost totaled. My boss man had close enough ties with the governor of Alabama that we got all of their Crown Victorias or LTDs, whatever that they was driving at the time, we got all their work. So it wasn't nothing uncommon for us to be working on a state trooper car from the state of Alabama. Nice cars. They'll take a heck of a lick. And if you got the right kind of motor and stuff in them, they'll go down the road probably about 140, 150 mile an hour. And they will take a lick. And odds are, as long as the police officer is buckled up properly and the airbags go off like they should, odds are he'll probably walk away from the wreck. But I didn't know, because of the close tidings that my boss man had, with the governor, and that my name had already got circulated on a federal scale with basically all the federal agencies in America, that once they found out that I was working for Donnie, oh my God, I got ragged almost every day about me being the prophet and the bomber and the shoe bomber and everything else. Of course, he was just aggravating me, and I know that he was, but it did bring some uncomfortableness in the workplace of knowing that my boss man basically knowed my history. And he knowed my history probably within like less than 30 days after I went to work for him. Because once more, I was identified. My truck was identified in Montgomery, Alabama. Because I'd already been identified in Huntsville, Alabama. I'd left Huntsville, Alabama, and then went to Savannah, and I just couldn't believe the tension that was on me, to the degree that I was basically under this national web. And you know, it's one thing if you're a troublemaker in town and the county knows who you are. You're a drunk, you're a this, you're a that, you're a meth maker, you're a drug taker, you're a this or a that. Or you do something in a small little town and all the officers know you, 6, 7, 8, 10 officers know you, and the mayor knows you, and other townsmen knows you because you're basically a troublemaker. But whenever you cannot go from the East Coast to the South, to the North, to the West Coast, and you know that no matter where you go, they're keeping tabs on you, you know that something has gone entirely wrong in your life, to the degree that now you're being looked upon as being an enemy of the state. And that's exactly how they are looking at all the people that they just got through mentioning as an enemy to the state, because they are not playing games.
All elections in our nation are administered by the states, which are given the responsibility of ensuring a fair process and an accurate counting of the votes. That includes elections for presidential electors, Congress, state officials, and local offices. The state's role in this process is essential to the functioning of our democracy. Georgia, like every state, has laws that allow those who believe that results of an election are wrong, whether because of intentional wrongdoing or unintentional error, to challenge those results in our state courts. The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result. Subsequent to the indictment, as is the normal process in Georgia law, the grand jury issued arrest warrants for those who are charged. I am giving the defendants the opportunity to voluntarily surrender no later than noon on Friday, the 25th day of August, 2023.
And that's saying something about Atlanta. That's saying something about Georgia. Because ordinarily, they don't do that. If they think they got the goods on you, they're coming after you.
I remind everyone here that an indictment is only a series of allegations based on a grand jury's determination of probable cause to support the charges. It is now the duty of my office to prove these charges in the indictment beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. I would like to take a moment to thank the Superior Court Clerk, Shay Alexander, and her staff for staying late and making sure that this indictment was processed. I would also like to thank the men and women of Sheriff Labatt's office for keeping the courthouse open, but most importantly for keeping us safe over the weeks and months that have led up to this indictment, and for what I know they will continue to do to keep us safe. We also want to thank the Atlanta Police Department and other law enforcement partners who have worked with the sheriff to keep us safe. I will now take a very limited number of questions prior to going to sleep.
Quick question. Can you clarify in Georgia the mandatory minimum when it comes to RICO charges, whether it's servable by probation or how that might play out?
The RICO charges has time that you have to serve, so it is not a probated sentence.
I thought so.
District Attorney, what's the timetable for your trial?
In other words, no matter what kind of agreement that you work out with them, the seriousness of that crime, you're going to have to do, if it's not nothing but 24 hours, you're going to do some time. You're going to do actual jail time. The way I understand their laws up there. They're very serious-minded people. Of course, you keep in mind, Atlanta's a big, downtown Atlanta's like 3.5, 4 million people. I think if I'm not mistaken, Atlanta has just about the same amount of citizens as the state of Tennessee, which is about 7 million. They may not have quite 7 million, but it's pretty close. But there's a whole lot more money in Atlanta, I think, pertaining to Georgia itself, than Tennessee. I may be wrong about that because Tennessee's a pretty healthy state itself, pertaining to all the car industries and all the businesses that they have in Davidson County and up in East Tennessee and everything. But if I was going to be a betting person, I would say that Atlanta deals with more dollars per year than Tennessee. I may be wrong, but it's a big outfit down there. It's not like Wyoming or Nebraska, some of them other smaller states that may not have but 1 million or 1.5 million people in it. They're basically gun-ho. The people that come into that area, it don't matter if they're selling pizzas or cutting hair. Like I said, there's a lot of wheeling and dealing going on, and there's a lot of black market syndicate that they have to fight up against. It doesn't matter if they're chopping cars or selling drugs or whatever. So many different cultures are in Atlanta, and you keep in mind, Atlanta was one of the state prisons that I was held in as a holdover. That whenever I went into their state jail, it was like going into a city. Unbelievable in how big, broad, wide, and how tall the buildings was, and how many people that they shuffle through their system every year. And probably about half of those people that get shuffled through their system is not what you would consider true red-blooded Americans. A lot of Chinese, a lot of Mexicans, a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of Cubans, a lot of everything. There is so much of a mixed bag in Georgia. I guess that's the reason why the demands are so high towards having to have such of a big prison up there. It's about one of the only prisons that whenever I went into it, because of everybody that was speaking different languages and the size and the humongous, how humongous that it was. I mean, whenever you see live guards posted up on the walls, up in, I guess you call them birds' nests or crow's nests or whatever, and they're holding guns. Whenever you get off a bus and there's 50 or 60 people that's got live ammunition and guns, while you're chained to the next person beside you towards either getting onto a bus or getting off the bus, or the same thing in getting off of an airport or getting into an airport. Whenever you see this type of activity going on, these people are serious. Just like whenever I wound up in the parking lot 4th of July night going to and I forgot now what park it was. It was one of the downtown parks where they have basically their 4th of July firework display. And I had to stay about 3 or 4 hours in a, I guess you'd call it a riot bus. Brand new, fresh off the line. Didn't look like it never been used. Why, me sitting in this bus that would probably hold about 35, 40 people, looking up into this window, this little round window, looking at the firework display through this window, understanding that, Dennis, you have done something wrong that would cause this type of activity to be going on in a small town country boy that was raised up in Weakley County, Tennessee, that didn't get a good education, that had to go out on his own in the construction industry and had a major accident, and then he had to conform to another occupation and was doing body work towards being self-sustainable. That, Dennis, you apparently have done something entirely wrong towards sitting in the middle of this bus. It wasn't really a bus, it was like a paddy wagon, but it was basically for going in and busting heads and putting a large amount of people in there at one time. But they probably use stuff like that on, special occasions like New Year's Eve night or something like that. I don't know. They may actually use it periodically all the time because there's so much activity there. I mean, Atlanta is a very dangerous city to be in. They try to keep things under wraps a whole lot more so than what like Chicago does or other places in the country. But it requires so much detail in power and control. It's unbelievable in how forceful that some of those agencies in Atlanta, and my God, I don't know how many freaking agencies that they got that spread all out. Whenever you get to looking at the metro area, it's just like any other metro area. Whenever you got 4 million people or 5 million people in the metro area, it requires a great deal of law enforcement from the head all the way down to the bottom.
What is the timetable for the trial?
Yes.
As you know, in this jurisdiction, trials are set by the judges. And so it will be the judge that sets the date of the trial. This office will be submitting a proposed scheduling order within this week. However, that will totally be at the discretion of the judge.
You're the fourth person now to indict Donald Trump. Do you believe you need to be the fourth one to try him, or could you move it up? Do you want to be the first to try him?
I don't have any desire to be first or last. I want to try him and be respectful for our sovereign states. We do want to move this case along, and so we will be asking for a proposed order that occurs a trial date within the next 6 months.
I guess another reason why Atlanta is so serious is because whenever Sherman went in there and burned Atlanta down to the ground, they want to make sure that nothing like that ever begins to happen again.
Earlier today, there was a fictitious document, according to the Fulton County Clerk's Office, that was circulated online with charges against former President Donald Trump. That fictitious document matched exactly the charges that we now see in this indictment. Can you tell us more about that document leak? Because now you have the former president's lawyers who are saying this is emblematic of a serious problem with your office.
No, I can't tell you anything about what you refer to. What I can tell you is that we had a grand jury here in Fulton County. They deliberated till almost 8 o'clock, if not right after 8 o'clock. An indictment was returned. It was true billed, and you now have an indictment. I am not an expert on clerks' duties or even administrative duties. I wouldn't know how to work that system, and so I'm not going to speculate. Next question.
Have you had contact with the special counsel about overlap between these cases, and do you intend to try all of these defendants together?
Do I intend to try the 19 defendants in this indictment together? Yes.
And have you had any contact with the special counsel about the overlap between this indictment and the federal indictment?
I'm not going to discuss our investigation at this time. I'm going to take
The arguments made by former President Trump that this is a politically motivated indictment.
I make decisions in this office based on the facts and the law. The law is completely nonpartisan. That's how decisions are made in every case. To date, this office has indicted, since I've been sitting as a district attorney, over 12,000 cases. This is the 11th RICO indictment. We followed the same process. We look at the facts, we look at the law, and we bring charges.
Have you had conversations about the terms of surrender?
Will you try this case yourself?
Has the jury been cleared?
Sit down.
That is the district attorney for Fulton County, Georgia, Fani Willis, taking a small number of questions, as she said, before I go to sleep, after making a brief and to-the-point statement about the indictment that has just been released to the public. Again, we are looking at 19 defendants, including former President Donald Trump and some of his top advisors, some of his attorneys, his White House chief of staff, a number of Georgia officials, and others who have been charged with 41 different crimes. All 19 defendants charged as under count one in the indictment, which was violation of the Georgia RICO Act. RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. In terms of news that we just got there from the district attorney, I will defer to my friends here at the table, but what I heard was she is offering to all 19 defendants that they have until noon on Friday, August 25th, to voluntarily surrender. If they do so, they will not be arrested. She said she wants a trial within 6 months. She said she wants all 19 defendants tried together, which to me is a lot. And she said she went out of her way to say that, not about this case, but in context, that she knows what she's doing when it comes to RICO indictments. She said that she has brought more than 12,000 indictments, her office, since she has been district attorney in Fulton County, and that this is the 11th RICO indictment of her term in office. And again, her term in office only goes back to 2021.
Yeah, and this has characterized her approach. For those who don't know a lot about her, she is aggressive, and some would say over-aggressive. She's not the first or last prosecutor to take an expansive view of her powers. Defense lawyers sometimes call that overcharging. We were talking about this as we read it and then seeing her now. This is very broad. This is very tough. I would say if you are a defendant or a lawyer for a defendant named in this case, and there are some people who are not superstars with endless funds, it's very bad news. She's not playing around, she's not delaying, and she is not negotiating. So she's telling everyone, come in by Friday. We've talked a lot about the former president. She's saying he's like anyone else and has to come in by Friday to voluntary surrender if he doesn't want to deal with an arrest warrant process. She said that about everyone else. As you said, she wants to try it together. That's a sweeping proposition. I'm interested to hear what Andrew thinks, but I could call that something that some lawyers might successfully attack in court. And you'll see, 6 months, an aggressive timeline, but she has the power. She has every right to pursue it. She mentioned this is her 11th RICO case. There is a clue in there. RICO is a tough, sweeping law. Georgia's RICO law is even stronger than the federal version, meaning you can do more with it, which again strikes fear into the heart of defendants. But it's only the 11th one, so there will be lawyers who come in and say, if my client only, quote unquote, is accused of forgery, let's leave RICO out of it. Let's segment this off. Let's sequester this case. We're going to see all of those fights. But the headline for me, Rachel, and I'm very curious what our colleagues think, the headline for me is, this might be the most aggressive sounding prosecutor we've heard on any Trump case in this era.
Well, you know, she's handled more than 11. She was a career prosecutor in this office before she was elected to the top job, and she handled one of the biggest RICO cases they ever had. She also said, to my question about mandatory minimums, she believes that the mandatory minimum sentence on RICO does require everyone convicted to serve some time. You can't just get probation and satisfy the mandatory minimum sentence. And Rachel, I was struck too by the 19 defendants in the same courtroom. Donald Trump, you know, is going to have 2 or 3 lawyers. He's probably not the only one who's going to have more than one lawyer at the table.
Is it a RICO thing where all the defendants have to be charged together?
That's the way she did it before in a major RICO case. They were all in the room together.
Well, you might charge them together, but you separate them for trial. I mean, I remember listening to a podcast by you where you talked about this sort of fiasco of too many defendants.
The Great Sedition Trial of 1944. It was a long time ago, but having too many defendants and too many defense lawyers all pulling in opposite directions turned it into a circus.
Yeah, 19 is just not tenable. I mean, that is a defense dream and is a prosecutor nightmare. You cannot have 19. I mean, she may have said that. It's hard to imagine that you're going to.
You have to hold it in an arena.
Yeah.
So why do you think she said it?
You know, maybe it's because 1, it's late. 2, she was saying, I want an immediate trial in 6 months and they can all go to trial, as opposed to like, I'm going to propose how we're going to split it up. But normally, at least in federal court, a judge would say, I see that you have 19. I mean, we once brought a sort of Mob on Wall Street case. It had 100 defendants in it. But we immediately told the judge, you know, we'll see who pleads out and we will propose to you how we think it should be split up for trial in groups of like 6 or 7, what made sense. There's no way to have 19. If you were a prosecutor, you are really handing the defense, you know.
I bet you wouldn't have told the hangman judge that over in Arkansas, going in towards Oklahoma. It wasn't nothing for him to handle big cases. That's why he was called the hangman judge. Of course, back then they done things a lot different, but I'm pretty sure they had to deal with large amounts of people. It wasn't just 1 or 2. Whenever they have a court, sometimes they'd have a whole courtroom full of people, and if they all was found guilty and it was considered a capital punishment, they all got the same treatment, which was usually dangling from a rope. That's why he was called the hangman judge. And if you get to looking during that era, there was a lot of prosecuting attorneys that and judges that was very, very adamant in holding their position in a very, very strong manner. And that's what it took, and that's what it still takes to this day to maintain law and order, especially whenever you're dealing with a heathenistic group of people that thinks that they can do whatever they want to do to whoever that they want to do it to.
a circus. It's just way too many
Is that
defense
6
lawyers.
month horizon also possible, or is that more aspirational than realistic?
You know, I think we've seen prosecutors aspirationally, which seems to be the word of the day, actually. But I think you have to have an opening bid, and also I think because in Georgia law the defense actually can say we're ready for trial and force the government to trial. I think this is what you want to make sure that the court knows, the public knows, you are ready. I think one of the reasons we saw a bit of a delay from her January statement of charges are imminent and the charges now being brought, which is not a long time, but it's not really imminent, is that she knows she has to be ready. There are going to be a slew of motions that are about to come her way, and she needs to be able to say, Judge, you need to keep the case. She's going to be fighting to keep it in state court. And then, I think 6 months is let's say, aggressive.
That directly intersects with the timetable that Jack Smith has laid out for
There's
in the many of the
January,
same
February,
like,
May. I mean, the spring is going to be a busy Trump season if all of this stuff.
do you see are there storm clouds on the horizon in terms of timing the federal case? I mean, there's so much overlap between, especially the fake electors piece of this, which is central to Jack Smith's case. I mean, we've talked about this a number of times. Usually the pecking order is such that the federal criminal trial goes before the state. What happened? The judges are going to have to hash this out.
Yeah, I mean, if I were Jack Smith, I mean, at this point, you do want to have a phone call and talk to each other. I mean, there's just too many overlapping witnesses. You may have conflicting or overlapping theories. So if I were Jack Smith, I would be saying, look, my case may actually go away depending on the election. It is important for the public to see a verdict in my case, no matter what, and the public should be able to see that you will always be able to go to trial because it's state court, because it cannot be pardoned. So let me go first.
Go first, because I need to get there before he poofs the case
agree
by
to that.
poofing the Justice Department.
Exactly.
The prosecutors could agree to that theoretically, and then you watch Jack Smith get bogged down procedurally in pretrial stuff that Georgia doesn't have, or does have. One of them is going to be more bogged down in pretrial procedure than the other, and at some point, one of them's just going to be ahead of the other, and it won't matter who said, I want to go first or I want to go.
But the case with
What a tangled web we weave. When first we look, and then we realize they have been deceived. Good luck to all of us.